What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. So the Pacers are a real test for the Dallas Mavericks defense. Remember, the Dallas Mavericks had won 7 in a row going into that Pacers game, and they had been the very best defense in the league over that span. Well, the Indiana Pacers have the second best offense in the league, and they're particularly potent at home. They have a 123 offensive rating at home this season. That is just completely off the charts good. And so here we have an example of an unstoppable force versus an immovable object, and the Pacers just completely lit them up. They had a 127 offensive rating in the game. Early in the game, the issue I thought was overhelping, specifically with Derek Lively. Pascal Siakam was being really aggressive physically, especially in like semi-transition. Whenever he saw a little bit of a space alongside him on the perimeter to try to hit the gap on PJ Washington, he would just like hit him with the hard in and out dribble and try to get downhill to his right hand, or he'd attack him in the post. And in those situations, Derek Lively's in a spot there where Myles Turner, most of the time in these situations, Myles Turner was sitting in the dunker spot, although there was a couple of them where he was on the three-point line too. But Derek Lively's in a position there. He's got to make a decision. His decision that he has to make is, am I going to help or am I going to stay home? And that decision is one of the most important decisions for rim protectors and defensive anchors to make. Because here's the problem. When you look at shots that an offensive player is taking in a matchup, it kind of depends on what the defense is doing, the individual defender on the ball, as to whether or not it's a high percentage shot or not. So for instance, if PJ Washington gets absolutely dusted off the dribble, then you have to help. Because if you don't help, it's a layup, which is a 100% shot. And yeah, you're going to be leaving Myles Turner, but maybe if you get lucky, PJ can get back into the play and rebound, or someone else on the team can rotate and, clean up the miss if you're lucky. Your better option there is to take the shot away. But let's say PJ Washington is sliding with Pascal Siakam and he's kind of chesting him up and he's forcing him into like a tougher scoop shot over the top, which maybe in this case, a really well-defended possession, maybe it's only going to go in half the time. Well, at that point, it's your job as the rim protector or defensive anchor to make the decision that actually it's more important for me to keep Myles Turner off the glass here. Because if I sell out to try to block the shot, I might drop the percentage chance of him making it from 50 to something slightly below that. But if the shot gets over the top and misses anywhere around the basket, Myles Turner is just going to grab it and put it back in. And Myles Turner made him pay several times in the early stretch of the game just for overhelping. There was a play where Pascal's driving along the right side. PJ's right there with him. Derek damn near zones up, goes all the way outside the right block. And Pascal just hits Myles Turner with a little bounce pass right there in front of the rim. Myles Turner goes up and finishes with an and one. There was another one where he just jumped out of his shoes, even though PJ Washington was right there on Siakam, and forced him into a really difficult scoop shot that he missed. But as a result, Myles Turner was able to just go up and get the offensive rebound. And then there was another one where I thought that PJ Washington was completely in position and he hard helped. And, it was more of a 3-point look for Myles Turner because he was in the corner. And some of that is schematic. And I could tell just by watching the Mavs throughout the rest of the game, you could tell Jason Kidd kind of had them under the impression that specific guys like Myles Turner, they were kind of just going to let him shoot. Pascal Siakam, they were kind of just going to let him shoot when they caught on the perimeter. So that one I thought was more scheme related. But Myles Turner was really active early in the game, punishing Derek Lively for overhelping. And then in the second quarter, Tyrese Haliburton just completely took over the game in pick and roll and was just picking the Mavericks apart. This was a stretch where Daniel Gafford was on the floor, which we'll get into in a minute, but Daniel Gafford was running a really weak drop coverage where he wasn't exactly bothering the ball handler or bothering the roll man. We'll get a little bit further into that in a second, but started with the pocket pass to Myles Turner right up to the basket for an and one on the left side of the rim. After that, it was a pick and pop to the top of the key, knocks down a three. And then the very next possession, in this case, obviously Jason Kidd's asking for more help on the back line. Tim Hardaway Jr. basically abandons Andrew Nembhard in the left corner to essentially, I'm assuming, help tag the roller, although I didn't think he did a particularly good job of it. And Tyrese Haliburton, because he's literally the guy in the league, one of the 4 or 5 guys in the league that just makes perfect reads damn near every single time down the floor, hits Andrew Nembhard in the corner, knocks down a 3. That run was what kind of built the gap, because it was very back and forth there in that first half, because specifically Luka was like red hot to start the game. He picked up the Ben Mathurin matchup from the opening tip and just was ISOing him every single time down the floor. I think he scored on him 4 of the first 5 possessions of the game. So that kind of kept the game close. But that little pick and roll run from Tyrese Haliburton there in the second quarter built that like initial little gap in on the scoreboard. They end up going into the half up by 7. And then in the third quarter, kind of back and forth, the game hovers in that 7 to 11 point range. But in the early fourth quarter, Kyrie Irving gets Doug McDermott on a switch, hits him with a nasty step-back jump shot to cut the lead to 4. And all of a sudden, we have ourselves a basketball game. And then Ben Sheppard and Obi Toppin hit back-to-back massive threes. Ben Sheppard off of coming out of the right corner, just a little kind of wide pin down where he comes up to the wing and catches and shoots a 3. And then Obi Toppin actually hit one turning over his left shoulder above the break, a pretty high difficulty catch and shoot shot from Obi Toppin. But both of those guys hit timely shots all night, and those 2 particular threes pushed the lead back up to double digits. Wanted to shout out Ben Sheppard for a second because I thought he had 2 really important two-way sequences in this game. In the first half, there was a sequence where he hit a 3 on the right wing. Then on the very next possession, as Kyrie's pushing the ball up the floor in transition, he offers smart help as Kyrie's kind of got his head down engaged on the on-ball defender, and he ends up picking Kyrie clean, which leads to a dunk on the other end of the floor. So like a little 5-0 run basically by himself, which was a big stretch in that game. I think it was tied when he did that too, and it pushed it up to put them up 5, if I remember correctly. And then in the second half, we talked about that huge 3 coming off the wide pin down. On the very next possession, he had Kyrie in an ISO. Kyrie was sizing him up, and Kyrie opted for the jab step jump shot. And Ben's got some long arms, got a very good contest, and forced Kyrie into a wedgie, like the ball stuck into the side of the rim. So an ugly miss, which you don't typically see from Kyrie Irving all that often. So credit to Ben Sheppard, some really good two-way sequences in this particular game. And so at that point, Tyrese Haliburton checks back into the game, and he just closes the deal, picking the Mavericks apart in pick and roll again, just like he did in the second quarter. In this stretch, he was really picking on Maxi Kleber. And again, remember Dallas, like they run the drop with Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively, but with Maxi, they do a lot more switching depending on, how successful the screen was. And Maxi just could not handle Tyrese Haliburton on the switch. He got beat to a step back 3 going to the right. He got beat to the basket for a scoop shot. Next thing you know, you look up to the scoreboard and the Pacers are up by 20 and the game is over. So really, really impressive win for the Pacers to get their 6th win in 8 tries. Couple of other elements on the Pacers offense that I wanted to hit on. They ran the floor super well in transition, something they've done well all season long. Their bigs run the middle of the floor, but they always have corner shooters running their lanes on the wing. And then their guards just do a really good job of every single time they see somebody up the floor, they make the kick ahead pass. And there's real value in that for 2 reasons. One, if you kick the ball up the floor and the guy's open, he can shoot it. Ben Sheppard, actually his second three of the game, but one of the 3 threes he hit, we talked about the other 2, was on the left wing in transition. Just, you watch him, they get the defensive rebound. He's just sprinting up the floor, like head down. And then he turns around and the ball's just in his hands. And then he's already got his feet set all game long. And I've noticed this with Ben, just really good footwork, off the move at getting straight up and down, nice and balanced. But they just run the floor in transition super, super well. And then again, I talked about the other advantage of kick ahead passes. Let's say that Ben Sheppard doesn't have a shot there because the Mavericks defensive transition defense rotates out to him. In that situation, all Dallas defenders are suddenly looking up the floor to the corner where Ben Sheppard is, right? So even if they rotate, now all of the trailing offensive players have the advantage of the ball being in a situation where their defender is going to be looking away from them. And that creates opportunities for trailers to get open. Maybe you're a trailing shooter and your defender is looking up the floor at Ben, you might be able to change your angle a little bit and find a little soft spot for a 3, or maybe you catch a guy not looking with the screen. That's where you can find a lot of opportunities in transition and in semi-transition. But in order to do that, you have to make the kick ahead pass. Now, The reverse of that is guys are running their lanes and the on-ball guy just brings the ball up the floor off the dribble. Now the defense can essentially backpedal in transition and everything is in front of them. So that kind of gives you an idea of the difference between, or just an idea of the value of making those kick-ahead passes. The other big thing that stood out to me, two other things. Pascal Siakam's rim pressure. Just really, really, it's another way to get the defense in transition. But I really like it because it brings a physical imposition to the game. It's something that they didn't really have before that trade, and it's something I think that translates really well to the playoffs. That's why I put in my notes brute force. Like brute force offense is like an important thing to have in your bag when you get to the postseason. And there were a lot of possessions where they got great shots, not by running some sort of action, not by using, Tyrese Haliburton's offensive genius, but just by Pascal Siakam being bigger and faster than the guy guarding him and able to just kind of get downhill into the lane, make the defense collapse and make good things happen from there. And then lastly, a lot of really smart actions from Rick Carlisle that they were running to take advantage of specific issues in Dallas's defense. One thing that I noticed a lot in the first half is they were screening Luka and then using Luka's man, who was Ben Mathurin in this case, to then set the ball screen. So a very common basketball action that we see is what's called a ram screen, which is basically where you screen the screener to go set a ball screen. And usually it involves big men. And the main reason why is big guys struggle to navigate screens, right? And the reason why you do that is if you can create a separation between the big man and the big man's defender, it makes it easier for you to get an advantage in the ball screen. Imagine I'm the big guy who's on defense, and there's the big guy that's on offense next to me. If he runs up to go set a ball screen, and it's Tyrese Haliburton, so you have to be up at the level because he's such a good pull-up shooter, I'm just going to run right up there behind him, right? And whatever my coverage is, whether it's a hedge and recover, whether it's a high drop, whether it's a blitz, whatever it is, I'm just going to run up and go get into my spot, right? Then I'm going to communicate, call out the angle of the screen, and it'll give us a better chance to defend the action, right? But let's say someone screens down on me as the guy is running up to go set the screen. I now have to navigate a screen to get to my spot in the pick and roll coverage. And so a lot of times you can find openings there by creating a gap between the screen defender and the screener. And then that guy can set a ball screen. Now when Tyrese Haliburton comes off the screen, he's coming off into open space instead of coming off into where that, help defender is supposed to be. So they were basically doing that with Luka. Now, the reason why you do it with the big typically is with the big, they struggle to navigate screens. Well, Luka, especially in this game, and I thought Luka and Kyrie, who have been pretty good defensively for the most part this season, were both pretty bad in this one. Luka just dies on the screen. When he dies on the screen, Ben Mathurin runs up, and he's now setting a free and clear screen on Tyrese Haliburton. He's able to come off and, get to his pull-up jump shot or get to the next help defender in line to try to make a read. So really smart actions there. Last thing I noticed that they were doing was they were doing a lot of back screening the roll man in their pick and roll action, which is a variation of Spain pick and roll. So Spain pick and roll is basically you have a shooter underneath the basket while the big man's setting the screen, and then they basically roll and replace. So as the big man's rolling to the basket, the shooter is relocating to the top. And the two variations of it are sometimes the roll man will intentionally run into the shooter's man to try to get the shooter open, and sometimes the shooter will intentionally run into the screener's man, which will get the screener open, right? So that's the two variations that you'll see, but they were able to get downhill and get to the basket for easy layups just by back screening Lively and back screening Daniel Gafford with whoever it was that was under the basket. Sometimes it was Tyrese Haliburton with Andrew Nembhard on the ball. Sometimes it was Andrew Nembhard with Tyrese Haliburton on the ball. A lot of really, really smart stuff from Indiana to keep their offense humming. Again, 127 offensive rating in this game against a Dallas Mavericks defense that has been dominant over the course of the previous 7 games. Pacers' last 8 games, they're 6-2. Couple of quality wins in there against the Knicks and the Mavs. 4th in offense, 13th in defense, and 18th in defensive rebounding. So some of the best defense and rebounding stretches that we've seen from the Pacers this season, playing some solid basketball. They have a tough schedule coming up, though. They have the Pels in a home and home, and then they go to Dallas for a rematch. And then they're home for Minnesota, and then they're at Orlando and at Oklahoma City. So a bunch of bigger, more physical front lines. It's going to be a good test for them. On the Dallas front, they were scoring well enough to keep pace with Indy for most of the game, but then they went ice cold in the fourth quarter. They had a 6-minute span after Kyrie's pull-up jump shot that cut the score to 4. They had a 6-minute span after that where they scored just 4 points. Missed a bunch of good looks from 3, had some bad turnovers, so their offense just kind of stalled out. I was more worried about them on the defensive end of the floor in this particular game. I'm not worried about Dallas's ability to score, especially against a team like Indiana. They were never even really able to slow down Indiana's offense. They gave up at least 32 points in every single quarter. They could not find a coverage that worked. I wanted to kind of dive in on the Gafford and Lively thing. They're both very different. I think Lively's actually a better pick and roll defender than Daniel Gafford right now. Daniel Gafford, I talked about this after the trade. And I used the concept, the comp of like a Montrezl Harrell type of guy. Daniel Gafford's, in my opinion, is bigger and stronger and longer and a better athlete than Montrezl Harrell. So it's not like really that clean of a comp. But the reason why I use that comp is, Montrezl Harrell's an excellent roll man with great hands who goes up around the rim actively. He's a good offensive rebounder, right? But on the defensive end of the floor, the dude was just tissue paper. Now, Daniel Gafford has the potential to be much, much better because he's got the physical tools that a guy like Montrezl didn't have. But that is like the archetype that I look at. It's like a really good athlete, like pick and roll guy who's like an excellent scorer on the roll, who has real vertical spacing, but is kind of, problematic on the defensive end of the floor. And one of the specific things that Daniel Gafford will get himself caught into in terms of trouble is he'll get caught in no man's land in pick and roll. So imagine in a ball screen, there are two threats, right? In the 2-on-2 action that's taking place. Obviously, there are threats all, but in the two threats that are on the ball are the guy coming over the top of the screen, and you have to worry about a pull-up three, you have to worry about a floater, and you have to worry about him getting downhill all the way to the rim, right? And then there's the roll man that's coming off the other, after he sets the screen, he's rolling hard down the middle of the floor. There you're worried about, maybe a pocket pass and a little floater or a mid-range jump shot or any sort of lob pass at the basket. If you step up too high, Tyrese gets the pass over the top, there's dunk there, right? So you kind of have to do one of two things. You have to either concede whatever the ball handler is doing to take away the roll, or you have to take away whatever the ball handler is doing and concede the roll man, right? And it's a difficult job. Some of the very best defensive players in the world can do both, right? The Goberts and the Anthony Davises and Bam Adebayos and such, Victor Wembanyama. Those guys, they cover so much ground that sometimes they can like stunt up and bother the ball handler while also getting back and making plays at the rim. And one of the problems that Daniel Gafford was having a problem with last night is when he would come up high out of his drop coverage on a guy like Tyrese Haliburton, he wasn't coming up high enough to actually bother Tyrese at all. And so Tyrese was able to make easy over the top passes. But then at the same time, he's not back far enough to do anything to the roll man. And again, like if you are active on the ball, like if he steps up higher and he uses his length to get up more into Tyrese Haliburton, he can force that pass to either be deflected or to take a funky angle or to maybe he has to double pump or throw it super high, like something to disrupt that pass to make it so that it's easier for the backline guys to rotate. Let's say PJ Washington's your low man in this sort of situation. PJ Washington has a better chance to get over and blow that play up, or even a guy like Tim Hardaway Jr., who they were using as a low man during that stretch. He's got the athleticism that if you buy him enough time, he might be able to jump up high and try to make some sort of play on the basketball. But if you're not bothering Tyrese Haliburton, the pass is easily getting over the top. At that point, if you're also not bothering the roll man at all, you're effectively in no man's. There's like no man's land and pick and roll coverage. Like the best in the world can kind of do both, but like your job is you've got to make something difficult there. You either have to get up higher on the ball handler to bother him more or backpedal to take away the roll and hope he misses his floater, right? Like you got to do something. And too frequently, and again, I want to be clear with Daniel Gafford, he's got the tools to be a lot better than he has been. It's just more often than not, it's just schematic, him being in no man's land, and then two, just a little bit slow to kind of read and react to some of this stuff. And so, but just by upping his activity, and then just by being a part of a better defensive team where he can like kind of pick up what's happening around him, I think he can get better. And then again, the Kleba switching didn't work. That's an important anchor of Dallas's defense. And then their transition defense was bad. Indiana was just running out on them all night long. For the record, Dallas's transitions defense, I want to say they're 23rd in defense, transition defense points allowed per possession according to Synergy. So that's pretty bad. This road trip was always going to be a test for Dallas. And this is just the first test, but they failed their first test. And so their next chance is at Cleveland tomorrow night to right the ship.